So, as a result of Brown versus Board of Education, the entire segregated system of America starts to collapse. It wasn't only schools that were segregated, it was restaurants, stores, beaches, water fountains, bathrooms, basically anything in public where people could go was segregated. And this often led to unequal settings for African Americans who were getting sick and tired of it. Now, the big focus is going to become on gaining equal rights for all races in America. Now, I mentioned this group previously in the video before. This is the NAACP, and they're going to become big players during the civil rights movement. Now, NAACP stands for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and this is the group that's going to round up the lawyers to challenge segregation in courts, and they file countless cases against segregation in the courts. And they have had a long history of working to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. The NAACP was founded in 1909 by a man who would sound familiar, W.B. Du Bois. Right. W.B. Du Bois was the man who, during the Industrial Revolution in America, saw how the post-Civil War America was not treating African Americans fairly. Okay. So these guys have been going since 1909, but they really, really pick up steam in the 50s and 60s. Now, one of the cases that we know the NAACP for is the case of Colin Kaepernick. This man you see on the screen was a quarterback in the NFL. And he chose to protest police brutality against African Americans by taking a kneel during the national anthem. He'd go down on one knee and not stand for the salute. And people saw him as a hero for bringing attention to the issue. Others saw him as a villain for kneeling during what's supposed to be a patriotic thing, saluting America. But long story short, Colin Kaepernick will eventually lose his job as a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. And the case starts taking racial undertones. They bring up the point, well, what if a white quarterback had done this? Would he be treated the same? So the NAACP took up Colin Kaepernick's case, and it's still kind of ongoing in the courts. They still need to decide whether he was fired from teams and couldn't get a job in the NFL again because he was a black man doing that or otherwise. So the NAACP has a long history of challenging segregation in the system. And the civil rights movement is a very, very, very broad topic that I couldn't possibly talk about briefly in a lesson. But the quick hits of it are focused around this man. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the many civil rights leaders that are prominent during this time. Now, he becomes foremost because he just has a way of words that no one in America has ever had before. He had an incredible grasp of the English language, and everybody who heard him was fascinated by him. He was a Baptist minister, and he had been trained that way since he was a small child. So Martin Luther King Jr. was touring the country. He had an infamous bus boycott he led in Selma, Alabama, marched, and there's a movie based on his actions down there. But what most people know him for was his 1963 March on Washington. He rallied tens of thousands of people of all races to come and sit and listen to him. Now, he wasn't the only one giving a speech that day. There were countless other people doing it too. There were protests, there were speeches, there were even music concerts going on. But what the 63 March on Washington becomes known for is the I Have a Dream speech. And it is a very powerful speech where he calls for the equality of all races in America. So Martin Luther King Jr. had rallied thousands of people to Washington, D.C. Now, the march got the attention of the president. And at the time, that was Lyndon Johnson. So Martin Luther King Jr. and his fellow organizers really got the ball rolling on laws that are going to come to end segregation in the United States. In the same speech, he's also going to call for nonviolent mass protest. Because if you're going around cracking skulls, you ain't going to get your point across. All right. If you get people to listen to you, that's the way to go.